thanks again for everyone for joining us today. Excited to be here with the one and only Mark Graban. We have a very special webinar for you guys today. It's going to be called Ask Us Anything, Psychological Safety and Continuous Improvement. So as you may know, I am Morgan Wright. I'm the Customer Marketing Manager here at KaiNexus. Been here for over 3 years. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Mark Graban, our presenter today. So hopefully you've done your homework and watched the Psychological Safety as a Foundation for Continuous Improvement webinar that you should have received when you registered for this webinar. No worries if you haven't. A little bit about KaiNexus. KaiNexus is a software and technology company with an enterprise platform that supports all of your improvement initiatives. So if you want to learn more about KaiNexus, please feel free to visit our website, www.kainexus.com. And then now I'm going to jump into some introductions before I hand the floor over to Mark. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, so for those of you that don't have the pleasure of knowing Mark, our presenter today is Mark Graban. He is a senior advisor for KaiNexus. Mark has helped organizations improve for almost 30 years, working in manufacturing, healthcare, and software startup settings with a really deep experience with lean management methodologies and statistical methods. So he is an author, a speaker, and a consultant. His latest book is The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. It's been out for close to a year now. I can't believe it's already been a year. That's awesome. Mark is also the author of the award-winning book, Lean Hospitals, and others, including Measures of Success, React Less, Lead Better, and Improve More. So you can purchase all of those books through his website, which is www.markgraban.com. Additionally, Mark did earn a BS in Industrial Engineering from Northwestern University, along with an MS in Mechanical Engineering, as well as an MBA from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Leader for Global Operations program. So additionally, you'll see we have 2 other KaiNexians on the call today. We have Linda Vicaro, who is the Director of Lean Strategy, as well as Kaleigh Krauss, who is a Customer Success Manager. They're going to be helping us answer some of your questions towards the end. So now, without further ado, Mark, I'm going to hand over things to you.
All right. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, I'll give you a second here. If you want to scan that QR code with your phone, we're going to do some interactive polling, and that might prompt some questions. Thank you to people who submitted questions in advance. Again, you could submit questions at any time during the session, and Morgan's going to help moderate that Q&A, and Linda and Kaleigh are free to jump in at any point if you've got things to share, even while I'm presenting here, because these are topics that are near and dear to us all at KaiNexus, and we'd love to share a little bit about our culture and how we try to do things within the company. So the first polling question, partly just to check and test the polling and get some feedback. This was an experiment where we thought we would try an experiment with a flipped learning kind of webinar of asking people to watch a webinar in advance. We'll share this link in the follow-up to this webinar. I'm going to do a kind of short catch-up for those of you, and I'm seeing 8, 9 people did not watch the webinar, so please hang in there. I'm going to give a bit of a recap, and for those of you who did watch that webinar last year from 2023, I'm going to add some thoughts, things I've learned or thought about that were not part of that presentation last year. So thank you for your responses, and it's good to see that the polling is working. Hooray. All right, so psychological safety is, it's a phrase, people hear, but I think sometimes people jump to a conclusion about what the words mean. And I fall back on this definition and similar definitions, in this case from Amy Edmondson from the Harvard Business School. She's the author of great books, including The Fearless Organization and her most recent book called Right Kind of Wrong. She defines psychological safety like this, and this is the definition I'm using today and every day, that psychological safety is a belief. You could say, I'll add some commentary here, one's belief or perception or feeling that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with things including ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Psychological safety does not mean you have the right to feel comfortable all the time. Psychological safety means somebody you work with, whether that's an employee or a colleague, or that they feel safe to maybe disagree with something that you're proposing, and that you can have that discussion based on the merits of the ideas instead of trying to shut down conversation because of saying, hey, Linda, you're disagreeing with me. That's making me feel bad. Please stop. That's not psychological safety. Psychological safety is saying, Linda, Kaleigh, Morgan, please speak up if there's something you disagree with. I want to hear contrary opinions. I want to hear your thoughts, help build upon it. Like inviting that as a leader or a colleague, we want people to feel safe speaking up. And that's really just in a nutshell what psychological safety is. Do you feel, or how safe do you feel speaking up? And we should all, I think, have that ability within a workplace because that really does lead to success. So I think I talked about in the webinar a year ago, pictured here, from a Toyota plant, the andon cord. To pull the andon cord requires psychological safety. And this is part of the Toyota culture where it's an expectation that if you see a problem or you suspect a problem or you've made a mistake, the andon cord is a way to speak up. Lights flash, chimes, blink, or there's my mistake, chimes sound. And within seconds, a team leader is there with a kind, helpful, constructive, how can I help response, right? So that act of speaking up is being not just encouraged, it's being rewarded by people in the workplace, which helps people then continue pulling the andon cord. So what's required to speak up verbally or pulling an andon cord or in any setting? I think, again, there's that psychological safety. Do I feel safe raising a concern, sharing an idea? But I think it requires more. It requires some effective problem solving. Because if you pull the andon cord and someone comes over and says, oh, it's okay, don't feel bad, you dropped a part, I know you didn't mean to do it, and they pull the cord again to keep the line running again, and then 5 minutes later, the same problem occurs. And like if people are pulling the andon cord, we need more than just not getting in trouble. We need a helpful problem-solving response for people to feel like it's not only safe, but worthwhile to speak up or to pull the andon cord. And this is where I think a lot of organizations related to lean or continuous improvement have invested a ton of time and money in problem-solving training, which is great. But if you don't feel safe pointing out problems, you can't put the problem-solving training to use. So we need both. And sometimes organizations need to play catch up a little bit when it comes to psychological safety. So I think we look at other lean practices. It's not just andon cords. Like if we're going to have effective tiered huddles where we're not just going through the motions of having the huddle, that requires psychological safety. So people can speak up and share problems or concerns to escalate certain concerns. And it requires problem solving because, again, people will stop reporting the same problems over and over again if it feels kind of futile. If we're playing catchball in strategy deployment or kind of getting input around an idea, catchball back and forth, up and down across pillars or silos of an organization as we're breaking down silos. I think effective catchball requires, again, both psychological safety and effective problem solving. Part of catchball would be an employee speaking up and maybe telling their manager, I don't know if I agree with that target. I don't know if I agree that these are the right breakthrough countermeasures to choose to try to help close gaps in performance. You need to feel safe speaking up about things like that. Daily improvement, continuous improvement, Kaizen, whatever we might call it. Again, we need both psychological safety and problem solving because there's research that shows when there are higher levels of psychological safety in a team, there are fewer workarounds and more, I'll call them real improvements or effective countermeasures. So, without psychological safety, we have what we might call a fear factor, where we know this is a dynamic in a lot of workplaces. Ethan Burris at University of Texas, Austin, has done a lot of research that shows actually the second highest factor of why people choose to stay quiet, and that's a choice, and that choice can be understandable, is because of fear. They suspect or they fear or they know, based on what they've seen in the workplace, that if I disagree about this, I'm going to be ostracized, or I'm going to get in trouble or get fired. I've heard, sadly, stories about all of those things happening when people have spoken up and disagreed in a workplace, and we don't want that. But number one factor, slightly higher than the fear factor. If people aren't afraid to speak up, there's a futility factor. And I've heard people say this in workplaces, hospitals, quite literally. I'm not afraid to speak up. It's just not worth the effort, because we point out these problems and nothing happens. And that could be because leaders aren't listening. It could be because we don't have great problem solving. It could mean a number of things. But that's why I think we need to focus on both. If we establish higher levels of psychological safety, we don't want to replace the fear factor with a futility factor. So this is going to be our next survey question, and I've asked different audiences this question recently in different places. Generally speaking, what keeps you from speaking up at work? And you can only choose one, but is it fear? Is it futility? Is it both fear and futility? Or would you say generally, no, there's no barriers to speaking up? So we see early returns. Well, good. Nobody so far has said fear. Otherwise, we've got kind of we got our first vote for fear. I'm sorry to hear that, but otherwise, we've got kind of a bell curve. I mean, this isn't a 1 to 10 scale, but well, there's 10 votes for fear and futility. I'm misreading my own chart. 1 vote for fear, 6 votes for futility, 10 for fear and futility. I'm sorry to hear that. And then 6 votes saying, no barriers to speaking up. So thank you everybody for sharing and voting there. And we can maybe talk about this during the Q&A and discussion portion. I've shared this question with a little bit larger audience on LinkedIn. I made a mistake. I try to admit and share my mistakes. LinkedIn doesn't allow you to edit the poll. So what keeps you from speak up at work? Should say, of course, what keeps you from speaking up at work? And the responses from 247 votes on LinkedIn were similar. 12% fear, 29% futility, 30% fear and futility, and then 29% no barriers to speaking up. So I think this does line up with Ethan Burris's research that the futility factor, I think, is slightly higher, more frequent, more common of a barrier. So again, if you've got questions about any of this, please do submit those using the Q&A. I want to also recap and recommend the work of Timothy R. Clark and his company Leader Factor. He's written a great book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And he has a similar definition that Amy Edmondson uses about feeling safe to speak up, safe to ask questions, safe to say, I don't know, safe to challenge the status quo without punishment. His more succinct definition, I think, is interesting. He says you could define it as a culture of rewarded vulnerability. Is our culture, is our workplace rewarding vulnerability? And this is a word where I think it's maybe helpful to look at the dictionary definition, and I'll slow down a little bit. That'll help a lot. What is vulnerability? It's basically doing anything that exposes yourself to the risk of harm or loss, right? So to some degree. Like, I'm not scared to present and lead a webinar, but stumbling over my words or saying the wrong thing, like, is there a huge damage to my professional reputation? Probably not, because we all stumble over words, and I get excited about things, and I try to talk too fast sometimes. It's being human. But in a workplace, pretty much any interaction with other human beings might be risky to some degree. Like, vulnerability here doesn't mean oversharing about personal things, even though sharing personal things about yourself might be risky, depending on the circumstances and the situation. But there's this question of, like, instead of focusing on the person is vulnerable, we're talking about their actions. And we want to, I think, really reduce the amount of risk, reduce the fear factor, so that people do feel safe speaking up. And another word that Tim Clark uses that I think is in some ways more helpful is the word candor. So candor is different than honesty. Candor means basically being frank, open, and sincere in speech. So when we choose to speak up, am I able to say what I want to say or what I feel like I should say? So we want people to feel like they can speak candidly. So to modify Clark's definition, we could say psychological safety is a culture of rewarded candor, not punishing candor, but rewarding it. And we know, sadly, different types of candor might be punished. I don't know. Linda, Kaleigh, Morgan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Like, what's an example in some workplaces of candor that might not be well received, that might be punished?
Thing that immediately comes to my mind is challenging the way we've always done things.
Yeah. Challenging the status quo, saying things could be better. Like, to us, that's really positive, but I've been in workplaces where people really bristle at that. And people get told, like, hey, stop being negative.
Yeah.
That would be a form of punishment, right?
Mm-hmm. In a similar vein, I think sometimes giving feedback can be seen as like, oh, it's too candid of a feedback, too direct. And so some people may appreciate that and others may not. So that could be a variable one.
Yeah. And if a leader is inviting feedback, we would probably feel safer to be candid and being candid in a way that's respectful. Like, I think that's a different dimension. But yeah, so speaking up to answer a question like that, again, Linda and Kaleigh, I hope you didn't feel any great risk of harm or loss, that wasn't highly vulnerable, but you were both, candid there. It might be less vulnerable in settings for people to, again, use the anonymous polling. So we have an opportunity here to type in some free-form responses, examples of candor that might be punished. And you might think to your own current or previous workplace experiences, pointing out a problem, admitting a mistake, or just a couple examples of candor that might unfortunately be punished. So we'll see what kind of responses come in. And while we're waiting on that, Morgan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there anything that comes to mind for you? How would you answer this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what Kaleigh shared is kind of what I was thinking too. And even sometimes I think when feedback is requested, it can still feel like that little sense of uneasiness, right? If your culture isn't there, even if you're inviting me to give you feedback, do you really want it? So that definitely is what came to my mind. But I just wanted to point out a few things we had in the chat. Yeah. Kate shared pointing out a wage gap. I think that's the great example. And then we also had in Agile, we really do believe that candor must be accompanied by empathy, which I think is as well.
Empathy and respect. And yeah. Absolutely. And so we've got some responses here expressing dissatisfaction, pointing out ethics violations, correcting a superior, pointing out someone's abusive behavior, slowing down to understand a problem, pushing back on physician behavior, asking why something is happening, talking to people about their mistakes, These are all great responses here. Asking to pursue problem solving versus going with a gut solution. Ooh, pointing out during leadership training that the CEO leading the training is a tyrant. Well, yes, that candor could be career limiting, especially with that description. Questioning a direction, suggesting a meeting might not be useful. I mean, again, like in some cultures, almost any interaction might be vulnerable, risky, dangerous. If we're encouraging candor, we have to reward candor, right? So there are workplace scenarios where a leader might say, I want to hear your candid feedback. And then when somebody follows that lead and they get punished for it, they learn, well, I'm never doing that again. They said it's an open door policy. They said they want to hear our ideas. If that's not followed up with rewarding type behavior responses, people will either say, no, this is fearful or futile. So thank you, everybody, for putting those in. And again, this is all very situational. What might be vulnerable for you in a certain team might not feel vulnerable to somebody else in a different company, because it's not about the people acting, it's about the environment that they're acting in that helps us determine, is it safe to speak up or not? So somebody in that poll, thank you for those responses, talked about pointing out mistakes. I'm going to cover a couple things here. We have a couple more surveys, and then we'll open up for more free-form Q&A. When we point out a mistake, or when a mistake gets admitted by an employee, they're being candid. Hopefully, they're not afraid to do that. I think there are kind of three general high-level responses to mistakes. I'm going to, traffic light, color code these. There are punitive responses. Hopefully, I'm preaching to the choir here that we would agree, even if our organizations don't agree, that punitive responses to mistakes are counterproductive, because it drives people to hide and cover up mistakes when they can get away with it. We can't learn from and prevent mistakes that we don't know about. So if we're shifting from punitive, this is where I think some organizations get stuck. And I credit my friend Karen Ross, and I'll point you to her book, The Kind Leader, and her previous KaiNexus webinar that she did. Some organizations and leaders have what you might call a nice response, where nice is really about not wanting someone else to feel bad. Mm-hmm. So a nice response to a mistake, in a way, might be better than punitive. We're not firing individuals for systemic mistakes, but the nice response says things like, well, it's okay. Don't feel bad. I know you didn't mean to do it. It'll be okay. And then that's often the end of the discussion, right? So then maybe we're doomed to repeat the same mistake because we haven't gone beyond helping someone feel better into problem solving and improvement mode, where, I think Karen does a great job of pointing out that kind is focused on being helpful, right? So we might say things like, okay, I know you didn't mean to do it. Please don't feel bad. And that person might still feel bad anyway. And we can try to help in an empathetic way, work them through that. But then I think we need to take those next steps when the timing is right to say, what did we learn from that mistake? Do we understand what allowed that to happen? Are we going to do root cause analysis? Can we put corrective actions and mistake proofing in place? Like, to me, that's kind. Like, nobody wants to make mistakes. People want to do quality work. And if we're not helping them improve, that, I would say the kindest reaction to mistakes is helping somebody learn and improve and help them and the team prevent that from happening again. Like in KaiNexus, there's a good culture of people sharing mistakes so others can learn from that. Like, I think that's part of, kind of a kind and constructive learning response. All right, so let's do another poll. I'm going to ask you to generalize again. In your workplace, what's the most likely reaction to mistakes? Is it punitive? Is it nice? Is it kind? So we'll watch those votes come in. I'm looking at the chat. Fred made a comment, and maybe we can explore this in the Q&A, or I'd love to hear more from you about this, Fred, said it's important to reward approximately right candor, not just the right or perfect candor. So I don't know, Fred, I'd ask you maybe to elaborate on that a little bit in the comments, if you can share an example. I think that's an interesting idea. So, so far the votes coming in, we've got 6 saying punitive. Those might be the same 6 people who said there's a fear barrier. I don't know. Like, we can't trace the votes to individual people, but we have 6 people saying punitive response, 9 saying a nice response, and 11 saying a kind response. And this is roughly the distribution that I've seen when I've surveyed, even recently at a lean conference last week. You're realizing we're getting people's input across different organizations. Now, at our KaiNexus mid-annual meeting recently, we did a review session on psychological safety, and I asked the KaiNexians in the room, it was about 40 people who responded to the survey. And again, I don't think people were pressured into voting the way I or leadership would want to hear. I see Linda shaking her head. Well, no. Again, anonymous polling. I think we have a good baseline of psychological safety. There were 0 votes for punitive, which is great to see. Like, that's the culture that we're really actively trying to build at KaiNexus. And there was still a distribution kind of, roughly evenly between nice and kind, right? So I think we still have a way to go in trying to think, how do we focus on, kind responses? Again, I'll take nice over punitive, but at least the way I'm trying to define it here, I think kind is even more constructive. So thank you for those responses. Okay, then final thing here, and we'll do one more poll, is some lessons. I shared this last year, but I've kind of changed the way I talk about this a little bit. So those of you who watched my webinar recently might remember there were 2 gears and 2 steps, and I've added a 3rd gear because I think it's worth calling out the 3rd piece of this, of what can we do as leaders and as colleagues to help boost that feeling of psychological safety. First off, as I've shared before, and I credit Tim Clark for this framework, is modeling vulnerability, or we could say modeling candor. When leaders say things like, I don't know, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I have an idea, but let's test it because I'm not sure if it's a perfect idea. Like, modeling those behaviors, inviting feedback, inviting discussion is a key first step. Now, the piece I've added in the middle, which I think is worth calling out explicitly, is to encourage candor. I think it's much better received when the encouraging candor follows the modeling of candor. I think if leaders are just encouraging the behaviors without modeling them, people are going to be really skeptical and maybe less willing to speak up about things. And then the key step, as I mentioned earlier, is not just encouraging candor, but rewarding it. Like, not tolerating candor, but really thanking people and leaning in and listening. And, one other thing, it's a thought that's occurred to me, I think in the past years, again, psychological safety means we all get to have our say. It doesn't mean we all get our way, right? So we can speak up, and I could speak candidly and disagree, and Linda might disagree back, and we're talking through it. And if it's something where it's ultimately Linda's decision as a leader, okay, I had my say. It was considered, it was respectfully discussed, and chances are I'm going to walk away from that feeling all right. It doesn't mean we're not going to have perfect consensus a lot of times on things, but if we've all had our say and it's been handled in a respectful way, we're more likely to speak up again in the future, as opposed to being just ignored or shut down or dismissed or what have you. Okay, so then the final thing I want to share from Tim Clark, and we'll do a poll around this. His framework of the 4 stages of psychological safety is incredibly helpful to help break down the problem, if you will, to think of a progression that teams or organizations go through. So from Clark's research, we see stage 1 is what he calls inclusion safety. Can I be my authentic self? Do I feel included, accepted, and respected? Without that, it's hard to progress much further than that. Stage 2 is what he calls learner safety. Do I feel safe to learn and grow? Do I feel safe to ask questions, to admit mistakes? Like after training, is it okay to admit, hey, I still don't understand that yet? Do you get ridiculed for not understanding, or do you get help? Are you getting a constructive, kind, rewarded response for speaking up about learning? Stage 3 is what he calls contributor safety. Can I contribute and create value? Like once I've demonstrated my abilities, can I do my job without being micromanaged? And then stage 4, which I think is the pinnacle that we're aiming for, whether it's continuous improvement or innovation, is what he calls challenger safety. Can I be candid about change? Can I challenge the status quo? Can I point out problems? Can I point out opportunities for improvement? Can I share ideas? Am I safe to test ideas? Those are the 4 stages, and teams really do go through a progression. We can survey this. We can, kind of talk about remedial steps to help people feel more included, accepted, and respected if that is a bit of a gap. Okay, so final survey, and then we'll do some quick announcements and some more Q&A. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you agree generally in your workplace? Inclusion safety, do you feel safe to be yourself, ranging from 1 to 10? Learner safety, do you feel safe to learn? Contributor safety, do you feel safe to fully contribute? And then again, stage 4, challenger safety, do I feel safe to challenge the status quo? So we'll see these results come in, and I love this visualization because we're seeing not just the averages, we're seeing the distributions. And again, people participating here are from many, many different organizations. One thing I've learned is even if you're surveying people within an organization, you see variation, because psychological safety levels that are felt won't be necessarily exactly the same in every team, in every business unit, in every site. Okay, so we see responses coming in. This is kind of the results I've learned to expect. The inclusion score so far is an average of 7.0, learner safety 8.0, contributor safety 6.9, and now we see almost kind of a bimodal distribution there. And then the challenger safety, this is the one where sometimes it's almost a straight linear distribution. We're seeing responses right now ranging everywhere from, I think, 2 to 10. So that's going to remain open, even I think, as we go through some of the quick announcements, and then we'll come back into Q&A mode. So thank you again for these responses. We're going to share all of the polling results as part of the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow. So, okay, I went a little bit longer than I wanted to. It's part of my experiment, but Morgan, if you could do some of the announcements real quick, let's see what questions people have.
Absolutely. Thanks to those who have shared questions so far. Please keep sharing any questions while we're running through some quick announcements. And thank you so much, Mark, for that session. That was awesome. Okay. First off, our next upcoming webinar is going to be not until October the 2nd, but you can register now. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Title of that, of course, is Change Management and Continuous Improvement, and that will be hosted by Melissa Sherman. And if you are curious about other webinars we've had, please check out our webinar recordings library, also available at kainexus.com/webinars. Look for that link on the right sidebar. Everything is free. Of course, if you haven't already, please check out our blog. So that is at blog.kainexus.com. You can subscribe to either our improvement blog or our customer blogs when you visit the website, if you haven't already. And you can notice that QR code right there will take you directly to the website. And finally, we invite you to check out our podcast series. So please listen, rate, review, subscribe via your favorite podcast app. Of course, check all of that out at kainexus.com/podcast. Audio from today's webinar will also be available there as well.
And then there's the finally.
And there's the finally.
I changed this on you, Morgan.
Yes, no, absolutely. So before we jump into Q&A, after this is over, make sure that you share any feedback that you have, positive, negative. We'd love to hear it all. So now we will go ahead and jump into Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm just uploading. It looks like there's a good question there in the chat that I'm gonna
go for it.
Okay. So I wanted to start off with this question before we jump into some more in-depth ones. So I think this is really important to understand. So what is an and-on chord? We had a question in the chat.
Yeah. I've been talking a lot. Linda, you're able to answer that if you would.
I could, sure. Yep, I could take it here. So in one of the images, we actually saw an and-on chord. And that was in the Toyota factory example where you can actually see a cord running overhead. And when somebody has a problem that they need help with, they pull that cord. The leader for their area comes and helps them to solve that problem, helps to make sure it doesn't happen again, elevates it to the next level if it needs to be. And the key here, something that I think about a lot, not in a manufacturing setting, is just when you have a problem, what are your resources? Who is available to help you? Who has the interruptible work to be able to just step over and support you in investigating that problem and figuring out what the right next step is to resolving it? I don't know that we all put the attention that we should on this aspect of our improvement culture in thinking about who can step away and support improvement when the moment comes that it's needed.
Yeah. Thank you. And maybe I'll pose a question to our KaiNexians here. We literally don't have cords hanging from the ceiling, but what are your thoughts, or can you think of a scenario of, having to stop, call timeout on something to point out a problem or ask for help in the context of the work you do?
I think I can think of several examples, especially as a customer success manager. There are multiple times where customers will come to us with a bug or a problem, and it's so easy to say, "Oh, I got this," and I can start going into it. I'm like, wait a second, this is a lot bigger. This is a bigger problem, or this is something that I can't solve by myself. And it's recognizing when I need help and when I need to escalate something, that I need to stop, pause, and then decide. It's like, okay, who's the right people to escalate this to? And that happens for a lot of a variety of different reasons. But I would say that I ask for help multiple times a day without problem.
And I hope you're getting a kind and helpful response when you do.
Every time.
I just want to piggyback off of what Kaleigh said. I think early in my career, I found myself pulling the and-on cord a little bit too early, rather than, okay, let me dig in. Let me see if I can figure it out. Let me check these different places. Okay, I do need help. And being able to come to whoever that person is and saying, I tried this and that, not quite sure where to go from here, made me feel a lot more comfortable and confident, I think, going to somebody for help.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those gray area judgment calls. And I think, a leader can give feedback to people if, trying to find that balance. I've seen this in different teams of a leader kind of trying to gently coach or push back on what have you done to try to investigate that? What have you tried to fix that problem? Because it doesn't scale well to try to escalate everything to the leader for them to problem solve it, right? So there's this balance of being a supportive, helpful servant leader, but not breeding dependence. You also have to be developing people, or in your case, Morgan, it seems like you pushed yourself there of let me do some things that would develop me. But then if you really are stuck, ask for help, right?
Absolutely.
I do want to make a
is Kaleigh paused here for anybody
Oh,
else?
I thought I wasn't sure whose internet
Okay.
out. So maybe hopefully we'll get Kaleigh back. But I was noticing in the chat here, I wanted to refer to a couple comments here. So one, Fred said, at some of my clients, the word escalation is a 4-letter word, a bad thing to do. Well, I think a lot of that is probably based on like what response do you get? Is escalating a problem viewed as like, well, I ratted them out and now they got yelled at? Well, sure, that wouldn't be appreciated. But if the escalation, like in a good tiered huddle system, Cleveland Clinic, one of our customers, has a great tiered huddle system that goes all the way from the frontline teams up to the C-suite. And I know what they're aiming for is to be helpful. Because if people aren't rewarded for escalating things through not just a positive response, but help in solving the problems, they're gonna stop escalating things. And then one other comment here from Kate. I believe the andon cord also stops the manufacturing line, which is why people are fearful of pulling it. Well, again, I think that's totally based on the culture, right? So if the problem doesn't get resolved very quickly, the line or that segment of the line will stop. Like I've got this thought experiment of, let's say somebody quit Toyota after 10 years because they had to move with their family and they took a job at another factory that had physical andon cords without the same culture. Like I've heard stories of plants where people do get yelled at for stopping the line. Well, that Toyota person would probably learn very quickly, oh, I can't do that here. The same person in a different environment. I mean, it's a function of culture. And that's why I think it's unfair to say, like, good people speak up. Like, well, good people need to protect their job. And if it's dangerous or futile, to speak up, I think we have to address that through culture.
I think that comes back to the question of rewarding the candid behavior. And so if in this example, we know that as leaders that stopping the line is going to contribute to us being able to improve, and that we've designed a process where we stop the line because that's useful and productive, then when somebody does that uncomfortable thing, we need to reward them by thanking them. Like you were saying earlier, indicating that there's value, that having done that, they will, when they pull that cord, they will get the support that they need. And even if the line stops, the end result is going to be that the process is improved and there's a benefit to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Excellent. You have quite a few questions here, so I want to keep it. So next question here is, how can we engage shop floor employees with a mindset to adopt the methodology of continuous improvement? It's a great question.
My first thought, and Linda has a lot of experience with this too. I mean, depending on the starting point of the culture, I think you have to recognize if people have been conditioned to not speak up, of like, don't be a troublemaker, don't be negative, don't point out problems. You can't just, slap a Kaizen board on the wall or a huddle board or buy KaiNexus software and expect people to start magically using it. Like, I think you have to understand the starting point of the culture. I think this is where formal assessments or even informal assessments of psychological safety can be really helpful. We can't expect people to leap to Tim Clark's stage 4 challenger safety if they, don't feel included or respected in their team. So I think you've got to ask people to speak up. I wouldn't require it. Like, this is where I don't like quotas. But those who are feeling willing to take what might seem like a small risk to speak up, then you need to make sure that those ideas get worked on and followed through on, and reward them for it, and make sure that neither the fear or futility factors are still kicking in. And some of that can take time, but once the ball gets rolling, I've seen that culture change really positively within a couple of months. And now you suddenly got all the positive momentum in the world where you didn't have any to begin with.
one thing that I've suggested to some of my customers, especially those that are trying to engage frontline employees in continuous improvement, is asking them to say, hey, what's a little thing that you could do to make your day job better? And usually hitting them like where it hits home, something that can directly impact the work they're doing every day is a really good place to start, because then they get some reward on not only are they heard by their supervisor or manager, there's buy-in, there's interest, there's care, and then they get to experience the direct benefits themselves. And then that tends to motivate and encourage people to seek out other opportunities. Oh, hey, that gives me the power to do this. How about I suggest this? And that develops collaboration, trust, and that psychological safety.
Yeah, that's such a key lesson of ask people to work on things, improvements that matter to them. How do you make your job safer, easier, better? It can be counterproductive to demand an ROI for every single small improvement. Sometimes it's just not worth the time and the effort to calculate. Like if it makes your job easier and you feel good doing it, it doesn't cost us anything, just do it. Test the idea, see what happens, and then momentum builds, and then people do stumble into ideas that have, let's say, some really important measurable cost savings. You know, like nurses at a hospital that had an idea that they thought was just, it'll be a little bit better for the patient, and then they quickly realized, like, this was going to save $30,000 a year. They weren't motivated by the ROI, but it happened to be there. So I think you can celebrate cost savings when it's there, but don't focus only on that.
One of the things I'm hearing these examples suggest is that everybody feels differently, learns differently. And so if we say, hey, call out any problems you have, that's going to appeal to a portion of our population. And then a portion of them might feel more comfortable just doing some experimentation alone. We can recognize that. And then some of them might need to have a little bit more support and have, like Kaleigh said, have somebody ask them, what are some of the problems that you're experiencing today? Can I capture those for you? And I think that it just indicates that, we need to have a multi-pronged approach, right? There's no one approach that's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
True.
Absolutely. Next question we have here. When a manager has created a culture of fear and futility, where is the best place to begin to try to turn around this culture?
With that manager or their managers. I mean, if the manager is willing to try to turn a corner and acknowledge how their previous behaviors have contributed to those feelings, like the manager can't just do things like declaring, hey, it's safe now. Like that's well-intended, but ineffective. I think if a manager is willing to acknowledge their role and to go down the path of trying to behave differently or even apologizing, being candid or a little bit vulnerable, perhaps, about things they've done in the past that were counterproductive, and they realize that now, and please bear with me. We're going to do some things differently. And if I'm falling short on these new ideals, please call me on it. That doesn't mean people will all feel safe. But, I think a lot of times, again, like this flows downhill. From a positive example, I think we see this within KaiNexus, where, our co-founders and senior leadership team behave in ways that model the example for Linda. And then Linda is modeling behaviors for people reporting to her, like those positive, the positive reinforcement of modeling, encouraging, and rewarding can go downhill. Now, I think within a large organization, I've seen, let's say, departmental directors in a hospital doing all the right things locally. Their leaders above them might not share any of these ideals around culture, but if they're performing well enough, people leave them alone. And there's no risk of like somebody swooping in from higher up and criticizing people for admitting mistakes. I think it's got to start with leaders, and some people it's going to be hard. I'm going to try to, show some empathy, and if people have decades habits of operating a certain way, it can be hard. Sometimes it takes an outside change agent to come in and try to create a fresh start.
Excellent. Next question here. I found this one pretty interesting. So they shared, asking questions seems to help ease participation. So carefully crafting asking questions, something as simple as, I don't know, what do you think, can make it easier for people to make new discoveries. So then their question is, what are some of your favorite methods or questions might you suggest in a case like this?
Yeah, I love that example. I'll share one that I've learned relatively recently is when teaching or facilitating something, don't ask, do you have any questions?
Mm-hmm.
Because then people might be wondering, is it okay to have questions? Does that mean I didn't understand? Is that my problem? And asking the open-ended, what questions do you have? Is giving it's giving more explicit permission. I expect that you have questions. What are they?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could translate into other situations. If you're a leader asking for feedback about an idea, ask, what ideas do you have to make this better? Instead of asking, do you have ideas to make it better?
I think taking that one more step and saying, I know that you have ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you're all full of ideas because I know you, and I know that you're creative, and you know that you're doing this work every day. So can you share some of those ideas with us?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
One of my favorites are, this is just my perspective. I know you all have different ones. Can you share where I may have missed the mark, or where I need to think of things differently, and invite more critical feedback and growth in those areas.
Mm-hmm. I love that too.
Great call, Kaleigh. Next good question here. They say, I understand fear, but can you share some examples of futility? For me, if me or my team speaks up, we are sort of tagged with solving the issue ourselves, which in many cases, the issue doesn't really involve us.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of one type of futility of we're identifying problems. We're pointing out systemic problems that are out of our scope and span of control that we need help with, because it's involving policy or some other department, and we're asking for help and we're not getting it. So I'm going to stop pointing out those opportunities like that. Yeah, that's futility. I think another form of futility is this fear. I don't know. Like, I get in trouble if I try something that doesn't work. That might be more of the fear factor.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think about it, but I don't know. Other examples of scenarios where it's futility.
I generally think of it as, every time I say something, nothing happens.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to bother calling it out anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's very close to apathy. People stop caring or stop wanting to participate because they don't feel like their voice affects change.
Right. And I'm going to make a nonpartisan appeal to people: register to vote, go and vote, because sadly there's a futility factor where people say, I vote and it doesn't seem to make a difference. If anyone feels a futility factor, friendly reminder, if you, in your state, if you can still, in the US, I know we have international audience, but please vote. I hope you don't feel that it's futile.
Good call out, Mark. Another good question here. So they're wondering, is there an alternative phrase you might use for a psychological safety? In their workplace, they feel like people don't take the phrase seriously.
Yeah, I've got some quick thoughts on that, because that comes up a lot. It sounds really squishy. Sometimes even like the phrase lean, like an organization has already kind of coalesced around what that means, even if it's not the way I would define it. Mm-hmm. So another book I would recommend is called Speak Up Culture. Stephen Shedlevsky is the author. I've interviewed him on the My Favorite Mistake podcast. You give a plug for that. He frames it as speak up culture, and he's citing psychological safety. He cites Ethan Burris from UT Austin, who's been an influence on me and the team at KaiNexus. So it's, do we want a speak up culture? Do we feel safe to speak up? We don't have to call it psychological safety. Can we have a culture of candor? I mean, there's a book I haven't read that people recommend called Radical Candor. I mean, there's probably different ways of framing it. And one other, I think, key lesson that comes from Shed as he goes by, people will choose to speak up when it feels safe and worthwhile. So that's a different way of, I think, expressing the fear and futility factor. And I think his dimensions are helpful, where there are some situations where it might be relatively unsafe, but it's so important and so worthwhile, I'm going to speak up anyway. I think that's an interesting way of looking at it too. Like a matter of life and death, right? Somebody brought up, I think earlier, challenging a surgeon might be career limiting or risky. But if it's a situation where you think, well, that patient might die, that's so worthwhile, I'm going to speak up even if it gets me fired. And I'd hate to see anyone in that situation where they're having to make that kind of choice. But there's a lot of situations where it's not life or death. And so people learn to keep quiet. They get by, and the organization doesn't perform as well as it could.
I'm definitely echoing your call out to radical candor. That's a really good read. I think we have time for one more question here. So I'm going to read this one here. So it says, how would you suggest I handle a supervisor who requests, rightly, a solution to an urgent and complex situation, but despite an explanation of the requirement of feasibility, research, matrix alignment, it starts to border on futility, factor 10. I'm not quite sure what that means. In other words, how do I balance a business reality with a kind response so that the supervisor stays engaged?
So I don't know if this is the exact question. I don't know if I'm interpreting it right. I could be wrong. I'm going to model some candor there. Is it a situation where, like, bureaucracy, well-intended bureaucracy, is getting in the way of quick action, quick experiments? I don't know if the person who asked that is available for a follow-up in the chat. All right, I don't know, Linda or Kaleigh, or does that, what I'm trying to...
My first thought is that it seems like maybe this person is coming with a solution that isn't feasible. And so my general approach in that scenario is to ask for more information on the problem they're experiencing.
Yes.
And then that provides the opportunity to collaborate on alternative solutions that might be more feasible, and it keeps them engaged.
Yes. And that's so much more effective than, like, it's the old suggestion box habit of shooting down the suggestion, where what I was taught about Kaizen style continuous improvement is you focus on the problem or the opportunity. And if what's initially suggested is for some reason infeasible, that's our challenge to go figure out what else could we do as a leader. So hopefully those are helpful thoughts, even if it, and whoever asked that, if you're on, feel free to follow up via email. And if there's other questions there, Morgan, we can figure out how to address those either in a blog post, or we'll get together and record a podcast with some of those other responses.
I was going to suggest the same thing. We do have a number of good questions here, so we'll make some time to get those answered for everybody. But it is a minute after the hour, so I just wanted to say thank you, Mark, for your presentation today. Thank you to Linda and Kaleigh for joining as panelists, and thanks for everyone for attending and joining us today. Appreciate you so much. Hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Morgan, for hosting and moderating.
Absolutely. Anytime. Bye, everybody.